Welcome to Real Free News with Matt Wyman. Today we begin with the opening statement from a past report and then a summary of today's newly released report, followed by topical and select Redux reports, and concluding with a relevant classical philosophical summary. This is the third pilot episode. The official series premiere of Real Free News with Matt Wyman debuts next Monday, June 8th. In addition, the forthcoming book, The White Imperative, will release the same day and coincide with the show's official launch. The ebook is available for pre-order now, the audiobook will be available free online, and the hardcover edition releases that day. Stay tuned in for the next hour because it is going to get real free news. Over half a decade has elapsed since the orchestrated phenomenon known as COVID-19 first emerged from the shadows of late 2019. What the world was told was a spontaneous viral outbreak was never that. It was the deliberate culmination of an ancient, unrelenting ambition, the desire to rule the world. This vision, conceived in the minds of a select few across disparate eras, evolved into a comprehensive, multi-generational plan of unparalleled scope. Biological, societal, economic, and political threads were woven together with precision to exploit humanity's interconnectedness and bend it toward total centralization of power. Whether a physical pathogen existed in one form or another is secondary. What matters is the execution of the plan itself, the calculated disruption, the engineered fear, the irreversible consolidation of authority that reshaped the globe. The stewards of this design, the inheritors of that ancient intent, stand exposed. Their fingerprints are unmistakable. We know who you are, and we know what you have done. The ambition to rule the world did not begin in the boardrooms of the modern era. It flickered to life in the shadowed corners of prehistory, where the first visionaries, chieftains, shamans, or unseen architects of tribal destiny imagined bending the collective will of their known realm to a singular command. In those primordial days, the world was defined by the reach of a voice or the flight of an arrow. Yet the impulse was boundless. Power was secured through strength and ritual, but certain minds glimpsed something greater: the unification of wills, the erasure of dissent, and the forging of a shared destiny under one guiding hand. This idea survived through oral traditions, enigmatic markings on stone, and the quiet transmission of knowledge across generations. It endured the rise and fall of civilizations because it was universal. From the mud-brick cities of Sumer to the fertile banks of the Nile, from the steppes of Central Asia to the city-states of ancient Greece, the vision resurfaced. Conquerors like Sargon of Akkad and divine rulers like Egypt's pharaohs echoed its call, each contributing, knowingly or not, to a foundation that would span millennia. The plan was not yet fully formed, but its seed had taken root, patient, resilient, and destined to adapt to every age. As centuries unfolded, the ambition matured from raw desire into a calculated strategy. The collapse of early empires taught a harsh lesson. Physical conquest alone could never sustain dominion over an ever-expanding world. The inheritors of the vision, rulers, thinkers, and hidden networks, pivoted to subtler instruments. Faith became a cornerstone, as seen in the medieval church's ability to bind continents under a single creed. Trade routes expanded the known world, and economic levers were pulled by merchant bankers who understood that wealth could shape societies more enduringly than swords. The Renaissance and Enlightenment supplied intellectual tools: Machiavelli's science of power, Locke's and Rousseau's theories of governance, and the quiet recognition that control could be exercised through systems rather than brute force. Colonial empires tested global reach, their successes and failures refining the blueprint. By the industrial age, railroads, telegraphs, and steamships had shrunk the planet into a web of commerce and communication. Pandemics of earlier centuries, cholera, the Spanish flu, had already demonstrated how disease and fear could serve as catalysts for consolidation. The plan's stewards studied these precedents with cold precision, absorbing the lessons of mass media, global conflict, and technological leaps. By the late 20th century, the design had reached maturity, a multifaceted instrument that no longer required armies. It would wield pandemics as disruption, economies as chains, and fear as the ultimate unifier. We know who you are, and we know what you have done. By the turn of the 21st century, the ambition had crystallized into the phenomenon labeled COVID-19. This was no random event. It was a systemic construct of breathtaking sophistication, blending scientific capability, psychological manipulation, and structural vulnerability into a single weapon of dominion. Advances in virology, global networks, and instant communication provided the perfect stage. The architecture was deliberate, a crisis engineered to exploit humanity's dense populations, fragile supply chains, and deep-seated trust in authority. Fear was amplified through media saturation. Economic collapse was triggered by synchronized shutdowns, and emergency powers centralized authority on a planetary scale. Lockdowns, mandates, surveillance mechanisms, and digital tracking were not mere responses. They were integral components designed to normalize obedience and fracture resistance. Whether the mechanism involved a biological agent or operated purely through perception and policy is immaterial. The outcome was identical, a world brought to its knees and then remade under a unified framework. Global institutions dictated terms while nations surrendered sovereignty in the name of collective survival. Small enterprises were crushed, megacorporations and pharmaceutical giants were elevated, and populations were bound to centralized aid and digital control systems. Social bonds were deliberately isolated and rewired, turning the state or the unseen architects behind it into the sole arbiter of human connection. We know who you are, and we know what you have done. The rollout in late 2019 marked the triumphant execution of a plan centuries in the making. Governments worldwide enacted measures that mirrored the ancient dream of singular rule. Borders softened under the weight of coordinated directives. Economic power flowed upward as markets crashed and wealth concentrated. Dissent was pathologized and censored, ensuring that the narrative remained unchallenged. Geopolitically, rivalries were sidelined as nations aligned under a common threat. Their autonomy traded for inclusion in the new order. The phenomenon succeeded where earlier conquests had failed. It dissolved the old world of independent wills and rival powers into a singular, manageable domain. Biological or constructed, the crisis was the perfect instrument, precise enough to disrupt without total collapse, pervasive enough to reach every corner of the globe. Its stewards watched as fear, compliance, and interdependence became the mortar that sealed their victory. The world of old was gone. In its place stood a reconfigured reality, its peoples and systems aligned with the vision that had endured from antiquity. The impacts reveal the plan's true design. Politically, it centralized authority on a scale never before achieved, embedding emergency powers into governance structures that persist to this day. Economically, it consolidated resources into the hands of a select few, creating unprecedented dependence on global institutions and corporate overlords. Socially, it shattered organic communities, replacing them with digital surveillance and enforced uniformity. Culturally, it flattened diversity into a single narrative of obedience and survival. Every layer, biological, psychological, structural, worked in concert to fulfill the ancient ambition. This was never about public health, it was about power. The quiet, systematic transfer of sovereignty from individuals and nations to an unseen elite who had prepared the ground for generations. We know who you are, and we know what you have done. In summary and conclusion, the phenomenon labeled COVID-19 stands as the ultimate realization of a multi-millennial ambition to rule the world. From its embryonic stirrings in prehistory through its refinement across faith, trade, science, and technology, the plan adapted with ruthless patience until modernity provided the perfect conditions for its deployment. What appeared as a pandemic was, in truth, the masterstroke of an ancient design, a calculated orchestration that exploited every vulnerability of an interconnected globe to consolidate control. The stewards of this vision, whether a continuous lineage or a recurring archetype rediscovered across time, have been unmasked. Their fingerprints are on the fear, the policies, the economic shifts, and the enduring architecture of centralized power that remains in place today. We know who you are, and we know what you have done. The world you sought to claim has been reshaped, but the awakening is underway. The ambition that once operated in shadows now faces the clear light of recognition. The plan's victory, while profound, is not final. Humanity's awareness of its true origins marks the beginning of accountability. The architects may have bent reality to their will for a time, but the record is now written in plain sight. Their design has been laid bare, and the world will never again view such crises with the same unquestioning trust. For the accompanying original report, Original COVID Origins, along with additional resources and similar content, visit Real Free News.
Renewal of the white race begins with the decision of a single individual to live consciously and purposefully, then spreads outward through organized collective effort. This path demands disciplined families, parallel economies, intentional communities, heritage-based education, and cultural revival rooted in racial loyalty and self-reliance. Sustained action by committed individuals transforms awareness into tangible strength and territorial reclamation. This is the white imperative. The audiobook is available free online with each chapter released daily starting June 8th. The ebook is available now for pre-order, and the hard copy will be available at internet booksellers and the White Free Press.
Today's new Redux report, Legal Shields Behind COVID Policy, Unpacking the Immunity Framework that Protected Decision Makers, is a summary of the original report. The accumulative legal framework of immunities and the engineered absence of accountability in the COVID response. It is currently available exclusively in this production. The accumulative legal architecture of immunities and accountability shields that governed the COVID-19 response represents one of the most significant pre-positioned frameworks for enabling large-scale policy implementation with reduced risk of legal or civil repercussions. Decades of legislative enactments, judicial precedents, and administrative doctrines created a layered system of protections that effectively insulated government officials, public health agencies, pharmaceutical manufacturers, media organizations, technology platforms, hospitals, and educational institutions from meaningful accountability. Central to this structure were the Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness, PrEP Act, emergency use authorizations, public health emergency declarations, sovereign and qualified immunity doctrines, and expansive state-level emergency powers. These mechanisms, combined with narrow exceptions such as willful misconduct that proved exceptionally difficult to litigate, allowed the deployment of mask mandates, vaccine policies, lockdowns, school closures, and related interventions with practical impunity. This framework did not emerge in isolation or as a spontaneous reaction to the pandemic. It was constructed incrementally over decades through deliberate legislative and judicial action. The National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986 established a no-fault compensation program that largely removed vaccine manufacturers from traditional tort liability. Subsequent measures, including the PrEP Act of 2005 and repeated expansions during declared emergencies, further tailored protections for mass countermeasure deployment. Judicial doctrines granting deference to executive authority during crises reinforced this insulation. The result was a pre-existing environment in which actors could anticipate operating with broad legal safeguards when advancing policies that carried foreseeable risks of constitutional violations, excess mortality, medical injuries, and developmental harm to children. The strategic expansion of these immunities points to long-term planning and intentional design. Laws and institutional arrangements were positioned well in advance to facilitate precisely the conditions under which unprecedented societal measures could be executed with minimal fear of consequences. This pre-planning of the legal infrastructure itself constitutes an essential element of the broader coordination. Pharmaceutical companies, government agencies, global health organizations, financial interests, and media tech entities benefited from interlocking protections that covered development, distribution, promotion, censorship, and enforcement activities. By embedding these shields into the system, participants could advance measures while knowing that traditional avenues of redress had been systematically neutralized. This premeditated immunity architecture directly compounds the gravity of the offenses. When decision-makers operate with foreknowledge of layered protections, policies that produced widespread harm move beyond potential negligence into the realm of calculated action. The framework enabled what can be designated as COVID treason through the centralization of unconstitutional power, COVID murder through protocols and mandates foreseeably linked to preventable deaths, and COVID child abuse through medical and psychological interventions imposed on minors. The conscious exploitation of these safeguards, evident in the rapid invocation of PrEP Act declarations and emergency expansions, demonstrates malice and forethought rather than good faith error. The accumulation of immunities from the Reagan era through post-9/11 preparedness legislation reveals a trajectory toward creating a permissive environment for societal-scale experimentation shielded from accountability. The absence of robust oversight mechanisms further completed this architecture. Underfunded compensation programs with low claimant success rates, prosecutorial discretion, and judicial deference left affected individuals and families with limited recourse. This engineered impunity not only facilitated the response, but formed an integral component of the offenses themselves. The public record of legislative history, emergency declarations, and institutional coordination provides clear documentation of both the harms inflicted and the protective system designed to conceal and insulate them. To conclude, the pre-positioned legal framework of immunity immunities and accountability shields stands as compelling evidence of deliberate planning within the COVID-19 response. Through decades of accumulated protections, including the 1986 Vaccine Injury Act, the PrEP Act, emergency powers doctrines, and supporting judicial precedents, key actors operated with assurance that their decisions would face minimal legal challenge. This structure enabled the advancement of policies constituting COVID treason, COVID murder, and COVID child abuse with built-in impunity, transforming potential policy missteps into a coordinated enterprise executed with foreknowledge of protection. The systematic neutralization of accountability mechanisms underscores the premeditated character of these actions and reinforces their status as imprescriptible offenses under any serious jurisprudential framework. Confronting this engineered architecture of immunity is essential to restoring constitutional order, moral responsibility, and public trust. Perpetual accountability remains the only proportionate response to harms that were planned, shielded, and inflicted on such a vast scale. Only through full recognition of this pre-designed system can the foundations of legitimate governance be reclaimed from the entrenched protections that enabled their subversion. The original report, the accumulative legal framework of immunities, and the engineered absence of accountability in the COVID response, with additional resources and comparable content, is available at Real Free News. Courage was neither blind rage nor idle boast. It was the deliberate choice to face danger with disciplined purpose, blending physical bravery and battle with moral strength and counsel. This chapter details rigorous training from page to squire, sword drills, quintain charges, and tournament tests that made courage instinctive, exemplified by Roland's stand at Roncesvalles and William Marshall's calculated valor. It shows how fear was mastered through faith, preparation, and duty. Moral courage in speaking truth and upholding justice proved as vital as battlefield charges, refining the knight into a guardian of order rather than a reckless fighter. This is the Citadel Code. The audiobook is available free online, hard copy, and ebook available at internet booksellers. European-descended populations evolved distinct ancestry clusters over millennia of geographic separation, producing recognizable patterns of culture, cooperation, and behavior essential to group survival and continuity. Race, understood through the lens of self-preservation, functions as a practical and reliable instrument for securing safety, allocating resources preferentially to kin, and ensuring cultural and genetic legacy across generations. Throughout recorded history, every major human population has employed racial awareness as an organizing principle, practicing endogamy, boundary maintenance, and group solidarity to sustain stable communities and sovereign nations. This approach has demonstrably preserved distinctive ways of life against external pressures. In a marked historical reversal unique to European-descended societies, the decades following the mid-20th century witnessed the systematic dismantling of these protective frameworks. The 1965 U.S. immigration reforms eliminated national origin preferences favoring European ancestry, initiating large-scale chain migration from Latin America, Asia, and Africa. Parallel policy shifts across Western Europe, coupled with sharply declining native fertility, accelerated demographic transformation. White majorities enacted and sustained these changes through democratic institutions, redirecting fiscal resources, welfare systems, and public services toward populations with fundamentally different ancestral backgrounds and kinship strategies. The result is a consistent pattern of demographic replacement observable in census data across all historically white nations over the past 50 to 100 years. Ancestry serves as a visible proxy for deeper biological and cultural relatedness. Populations that maintain explicit recognition of these signals achieve coordinated advantages in territory, political influence, and reproductive space. The unilateral suppression of racial consciousness among European-descended peoples, while other groups retain strong ethnic solidarity, creates an asymmetric dynamic. Non-European populations continue to practice preferential treatment, block mobilization, and endogamy without interruption. European-descended societies, by contrast, subsidize this process through their own laws, taxes, and institutions, leading to measurable erosion of physical safety, social trust, economic prospects, and cultural coherence. Neighborhoods, schools, and public spaces reflect accelerating shifts with elevated fiscal burdens, reduced per capita resources for Native families, and declining community cohesion documented in objective statistics. Evolutionary adaptations in northern European populations, favoring high trust and universalist cooperation, combined with post-war ideological frameworks have reinforced this vulnerability. The outcome is a coordination failure in which one population funds its own displacement while competitors advance their interests unimpeded. No reciprocal benefits accrue to the European-descended population. The process yields only one directional transfer of land, power, and demographic space. Ultimately, racial and ancestral preservation remains the default, functional strategy for group continuity employed successfully by all other populations. European-descended societies must reaffirm this universal principle through deliberate policy and cultural renewal to arrest self-erasure, restore boundaries, and secure their historic territories, institutions, and genetic legacy for future generations. Objective demographic trends confirm both the trajectory and the necessity of this affirmative stance. Read the foundational report, Unilateral Racial Disarmament Analysis, Racial Preservation, Acquiescence, and Self-Erasure in European-Descended Societies, along with further resources and aligned content by going to Real Free News. Every great shift in history, every meaningful life, and every lasting achievement began with a single individual who chose to act. The world changes not through crowds or systems, but through one person who decides enough is enough and steers a new direction. Your life today is the sum of decisions already made, yet the future remains open. Your next choice can rewrite everything. History proves ordinary individuals, without fame or fortune, sparked revolutions in thought, persistence, and justice simply by claiming their inner power. You hold the steering wheel. Pause, declare, I am the one, and watch the hidden force within you awaken through quiet compounding decisions in relationships, health, and purpose. This is the power of one decision. The audiobook is available free online, hard copy, and ebook available at internet booksellers and mattwyman.com. The collapse of federal immigration enforcement represents a deep and deliberate dereliction of constitutional duty that has left the United States vulnerable to uncontrolled demographic transformation, surging crime, cultural erosion, and escalating threats to citizen safety. The Constitution vests exclusive authority over immigration and border security in the federal government under Article 1, Section 8, and the executive's responsibility for foreign affairs. This centralization was designed to ensure uniformity and national sovereignty when agencies such as U.S. Customs and Border Protection, including Border Patrol and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, cease meaningful enforcement, whether through policy directives, defunding, or operational paralysis. The entire legal framework for border control and deportation becomes a hollow shell. No automatic authority transfers to states, localities, or private citizens. Federal preemption blocks independent state action on immigration status or removal, creating a de facto open border reality where laws remain on the books but are functionally suspended. This vacuum is not a neutral policy failure, it is an active abdication that exposes American communities to predictable and severe consequences. The immediate effects are stark and measurable. Unauthorized crossings surge without vetting or screening, overwhelming border regions and interior cities, while not every entrant poses a direct threat. The absence of systematic checks allows criminal elements, human traffickers, gang members, fugitives, and organized networks to enter and operate with impunity. Local law enforcement retains authority over state crimes such as assault, robbery, or drug offenses, but cannot address immigration violations or initiate deportation. This reactive posture means intervention occurs only after harm has been inflicted, leaving citizens to absorb the costs of preventable victimization. Border communities face acute strains on housing, schools, hospitals, and public services, while interior cities experience rising demands that outpace resources and erode quality of life. The federal monopoly on immigration, intended to provide consistent protection, instead becomes the mechanism through which protection is withdrawn, leaving citizens exposed while the government retains its monopoly on legitimate force. This collapse reveals deeper structural asymmetries in American governance. Unauthorized entrants benefit from practical immunity, illegal crossing, visa overstays, and fraudulent claims go unpunished, enabling them to establish presence, access services, and eventually influence policy through demographic weight. Citizens, by contrast, remain fully bound by the law. They must endure harassment, property crime, cultural friction, and safety threats without proactive governmental remedy. Yet any defensive response is scrutinized under strict legal standards. Self-defense doctrines in many states allow reasonable force, including deadly force when necessary in the home or when retreat is unsafe. But these protections are individual, reactive, and narrowly interpreted. Citizens who organize beyond isolated self-defense risk violating prohibitions on unauthorized malicious or paramilitary activity. The result is a profound imbalance. Violators enjoy de facto leniency, while defenders navigate a minefield of potential liability, prosecutorial discretion, and political pressure that often tilts against them. This asymmetry erodes trust in the justice system and fosters a sense of abandonment among the citizenry. Demographic and cultural consequences compound the security failures. Sustained inflows combined with birthright citizenship and eventual pathways to naturalization and voting accelerate population replacement in key regions. Communities that once shared common values and social cohesion experience rapid transformation, enclave formation, and intergroup tensions. Economic pressures mount as low-skilled native workers face wage suppression and job competition, while taxpayers shoulder uncompensated costs for education, healthcare, and welfare. Cultural norms erode as divergent values clash without assimilation pressure, leading to fragmented societies where established traditions are diluted or challenged. These changes are not incidental. They are the predictable outcome of policies that treat borders as suggestions rather than sovereign imperatives. Citizens perceive this as a replacement dynamic that shifts political power, entrenches lax enforcement, and disadvantages the native population, outcomes made possible only by federal inaction. Citizen vulnerabilities escalate along a clear continuum: low-level disturbances, verbal harassment, loitering, or minor property crimes. Initially prompt documentation and reporting, often with disappointing results due to stretched resources or policy priorities. As threats intensify to physical danger, individuals exercise self-defense rights, but must calibrate responses precisely to avoid legal jeopardy. In cases of home invasion or imminent violence, proportionate force, including deadly force where justified becomes necessary, yet even lawful defenders face investigation, potential charges, and civil suits, while the original violators often benefit from systemic leniency. When governmental protection collapses entirely, citizens confront an existential dilemma. The social contract that demands obedience to law in exchange for security has been broken, yet the legal system still holds them strictly accountable. Organized resistance beyond individual defense is prohibited, channeling frustration into electoral processes that may be undermined by the very demographic shifts caused by non-enforcement. This dynamic leaves citizens trapped between escalating threats and constrained remedies. The broader governance implications are dire. Federal preemption designed to maintain uniformity instead amplifies chaos when the executive branch refuses to enforce statutes. States and localities are reduced to patchwork mitigation, local ordinances, National Guard support for observation, or prosecutions for ancillary crimes, none of which can substitute for actual border control or interior removal. The National Guard can assist with logistics or state law violations, but cannot perform immigration functions without federal authorization. Conventional military forces face even stricter limits under laws separating them from domestic policing. The result is a governance vacuum where the federal government retains exclusive power but refuses to exercise it, forcing citizens to bear the costs while denying them meaningful tools for self-protection. This asymmetry undermines the legitimacy of the state. A government that will not secure borders or enforce its own laws forfeits its claim to exclusive authority over force. Historical and comparative lessons reinforce the urgency. Nations facing similar collapses of border authority have responded with decisive internal measures when political will existed. The United States, however, remains trapped by its own constitutional design and political divisions. Prolonged non-enforcement accelerates a feedback loop. Demographic changes shift electoral power toward policies that further weaken enforcement, entrenching the cycle. Citizens witness their communities transformed, resources strained, and safety eroded, all while being told that questioning the process is illegitimate. The federal vacuum does not merely invite disorder, it institutionalizes it, converting what should be a sovereign imperative into a source of perpetual vulnerability. In conclusion, the collapse of federal immigration enforcement is not a mere administrative shortfall, but a constitutional crisis that has produced open borders, demographic replacement, cultural fragmentation, and intolerable asymmetries of accountability. By abandoning its exclusive authority over borders and removal, the federal government has created a de facto policy of unrestricted migration that burdens citizens with the consequences, while shielding violators from meaningful repercussions. Local and state responses are structurally inadequate, self-defense remains narrowly constrained and legally perilous, and organized citizen action is prohibited. The result is a governance failure where the state retains its monopoly on legitimate force but refuses to wield it in defense of the people, leaving citizens exposed, resentful, and increasingly alienated. Restoring order requires uncompromising reassertion of federal enforcement as the non-negotiable core of national sovereignty. This means reversing directives that inhibit agencies, restoring operational capacity and funding, implementing rigorous vetting and deportation priorities, and securing borders through physical, technological, and legal means. Half measures or continued reliance on patchwork state efforts will only deepen the damage. The American Republic was founded on the principle that government exists to secure the rights and safety of its citizens. When that government abdicates this duty, it invites chaos and risks forfeiting its legitimacy. The asymmetries, vulnerabilities, and escalatory dynamics unleashed by this collapse demand urgent correction before irreversible transformations render recovery impossible. Citizens deserve, and the Constitution requires, a government that enforces its laws equally, secures its territory decisively, and places the safety and sovereignty of the American people above all other considerations. Anything less constitutes a betrayal of the foundational compact that defines the nation. For the original source report, The Collapse of Federal Immigration Enforcement, Asymmetries, Vulnerabilities, and Escalatory Dynamics in American Governance, along with extra resources and similar material, visit Real Free News. Through the steady application of reason, we can engage with feelings in ways that preserve inner balance and support wise action. A practical sequence turns reactive emotions into information and opportunity, building true resilience. This emotional mastery sustains every chapter, preventing derailment while empowering virtues, habits, aims, reflection, modeling, adversity transformation, and the complete integrated protocol of sovereign living. This is the Inner Citadel. Listen to the complete audiobook free online or purchase the hardcover and ebook through major internet retailers. The New World Order constitutes a coordinated, operational architecture of global control that has advanced far beyond speculation to become a defining reality of our time. This network operates through systematic deception, institutional capture, and the incremental erosion of individual liberty and national sovereignty. Its primary instrument is an extensive apparatus of misinformation and narrative control. Media institutions and digital platforms function as aligned channels that propagate carefully curated stories, selectively omitting facts and synchronizing messaging during periods of crisis. The result is a manufactured consensus that frames centralized global governance as both inevitable and benevolent, steadily undermining the foundations of self-governance and personal autonomy. This agenda proceeds through the methodical dismantling of personal freedoms. Legal and regulatory frameworks are being revised under the pretext of public health, climate imperatives, and economic stability to expand surveillance, restrict privacy, and curtail fundamental rights to speech, assembly, and self-defense. Privacy has been rendered obsolete as monitoring technologies permeate daily life, creating a comprehensive environment in which behavior is tracked, predicted, and shaped at scale. Citizens are being conditioned into dependency on centralized systems where compliance becomes the price of security and opportunity. Education has been repurposed as a tool of conformity rather than enlightenment. Curricula increasingly prioritize global citizenship, emotional alignment, and obedience to authority over critical thinking, national identity, and individual initiative. Parallel economic restructuring ensures that traditional employment is destabilized, job security eroded, and survival tied directly to alignment with the approved framework. Individuals are transformed from sovereign actors into manageable components whose worth is measured solely by their utility to the larger design. Most alarming is the evidence of a deliberate depopulation strategy. Policies governing health, agriculture, environmental regulation, and resource allocation consistently align with objectives that reduce population growth and, in targeted instances, overall population levels. These measures are presented as sustainability initiatives or crisis responses, yet their cumulative impact reveals a calculated intent to manage humanity as a controllable resource rather than safeguard it as a free and sovereign population. The New World Order advances through patience and incrementalism, exploiting crises to justify greater centralization while positioning itself as the indispensable solution. Its ultimate vision is a uniform global order in which creativity, individuality, and liberty are subordinated to the interests of a self-appointed elite. In conclusion, the New World Order represents one of the most profound threats to human freedom in modern history. Its systematic campaign of deception, surveillance, and engineered dependency is reshaping civilization into a controlled, depopulated, and spiritually diminished society. Recognition of this reality is not optional. It is the essential precondition for any meaningful defense of sovereignty, liberty, and self-determination. The trajectory is clear, the mechanisms are in motion, and the stakes are nothing less than the future of humanity itself. Awareness must now translate into resolute vigilance if the encroaching darkness is to be confronted before it becomes irreversible. To explore the full original report, Discovering the Darkness of the New World Order, plus additional insights and related content, visit Real Free News.
The doctrine of equality stands in direct opposition to every observable fact in the natural world. Nature functions through variation and hierarchy, not uniformity, and enforced equality suppresses white excellence in science, art, and governance while diluting the genetic foundations of high civilization. Forced integration and race mixing accelerate measurable decline in standards, trust, and achievement. Rejecting this illusion restores natural order and unlocks the race's true potential. This is the white imperative. The audiobook is available free online, with each chapter released daily starting June 8th. The ebook is available now for pre-order, and the hard copy and ebook will be available at internet booksellers and the White Free Press.
Defensive rhetorical tactics represent a deliberate, highly effective system of psychological and social manipulation that systematically undermines accountability, erodes public trust, and enables unchecked power across every level of contemporary society. These patterns, named DARVO, denial of wrongdoing, attack on the critic, and reversal of victim and offender roles, do not emerge randomly. They form a coherent, repeatable strategy employed by coordinated networks to neutralize legitimate criticism of their policies, influence, and actions. By reframing factual inquiry as irrational prejudice or historical persecution, these tactics shift the entire burden of proof and moral outrage onto the observer, while granting the accused group unearned sympathy, resources, and protection. The result is a society where original harms remain unaddressed, institutions become captured, and democratic discourse collapses into endless cycles of deflection and inversion. This is not mere disagreement or cultural difference, it is a calculated assault on the foundations of evidence-based reasoning, individual rights, and collective cohesion. The DARVO sequence operates with mechanical precision. First comes denial. The accused group flatly dismisses or minimizes the accusation without engaging any evidence, asserting that the described behaviors are either non-existent or beneficial. This step halts substantive investigation before it begins. Next follows the attack. The critic is immediately labeled as driven by bigotry, an anti of some kind, whose motives stem from irrational hatred rather than observable facts. Finally arrives the reversal. The group positions itself as the true victim suffering ongoing persecution, demanding societal intervention, condemnation of the critic, and allocation of resources to combat the alleged prejudice. Historical grievances are invoked to establish perpetual victim status, transforming any scrutiny into an extension of past injustices. This triad functions regardless of the original claim's validity. Even when concrete evidence of wrongdoing exists, the pattern successfully redirects attention, isolates the critic, and extracts moral and material concessions from bystanders and institutions alike. In practice, these tactics prove devastating when applied to criticism of globalist networks and their coordinated influence over migration, finance, media, and governance, policies that demonstrably harm host societies such as mass demographic reconfiguration are reframed not as deliberate choices but as inherent expressions of a protected cultural or ideological identity. Any challenge is recast as an assault on that identity itself, triggering automatic accusations of prejudice. The original concern about societal impacts vanishes while institutions are pressured to address the manufactured crisis of bias instead. This inversion preserves the network's position of power and compels societies to subsidize their own transformation. The effectiveness of Darvo is amplified when layered with broader ideological subversion. Long-term subversion weakens core institutions, education, media, family, over decades, creating populations less capable of objective evaluation. Once destabilization sets in, defensive tactics like Darvo activate to neutralize exposure. The two strategies are complementary. Subversion prepares the ground by eroding shared standards of truth and accountability. Darvo then shields the ongoing project by portraying revelations as attacks on vulnerable minorities. Together, they produce a self-reinforcing system in which early manipulations remain hidden and later exposures are neutralized through moral blackmail. Society subjected to this dual assault experience, measurable declines in trust, innovation, and institutional legitimacy. Complementing Darvo is an arsenal of associated psychological manipulations. Gaslighting systematically undermines the critic's confidence by insisting events never occurred or have been grossly misinterpreted. Projection attributes the group's own behaviors, coercion, exploitation, deception to the accuser, blame shifting, and scapegoating transfer all responsibility outward, locating fault in external forces or the critic's supposed flaws. Two quoque arguments demand equivalent scrutiny of the critic's unrelated past actions. Ad hominem attacks dismiss evidence based solely on the critic's alleged motives. The Mott and Bailey tactic allows bold, controversial claims to stand until challenged, at which point the group retreats to a defensible cultural protection position and brands the original challenge as extreme. These devices operate seamlessly at both individual and institutional scales, coordinated through media, corporate statements, and aligned platforms. At a deeper structural level, the 5 elements of coercive control embed these tactics into sustained dominance. Double binds create no-win scenarios that generate self-blame. Doublespeak delivers contradictory messages that prevent clear assessment. Double standards apply rules unevenly, exempting the controlling group. Double vision distorts shared reality until the group's version is accepted as objective truth. The core reversal finalizes the inversion. Emotional levers, guilt induction, love bombing, followed by withdrawal, triangulation, stonewalling, and minimization reinforce compliance and punish resistance. When deployed collectively, these mechanisms transform public discourse into a controlled environment where genuine accountability becomes psychologically and socially prohibitive. Cultural logics determine the intensity and acceptance of these patterns. Honor, shame, and collectivist orientations, prevalent in certain regional traditions, treat any challenge to group reputation or cohesion as an existential threat requiring immediate deflection and retaliation. Reputation becomes collective face, subordinating personal responsibility to group harmony and loyalty. Criticism from outsiders is automatically reframed as prejudice, while internal conformity is enforced to maintain unity. In contrast, individualist and dignity-oriented societies stigmatize these tactics as abusive evasions of accountability. Yet within pluralistic Western nations, subgroups retain higher tolerance drawn from their originating logics, creating pockets where the patterns flourish, even as the broader culture weakens. Immigrant and diaspora contexts further amplify deployment. Integration pressures heighten the need for boundary maintenance, and accusations trigger instant reframing that casts host society concerns as irrational bias. The tactics thus serve as adaptive tools for preserving internal norms while advancing demographic presence without direct confrontation. The spread of these patterns is neither accidental nor organic. Individuals exhibiting elevated manipulative traits systematically infiltrate education, media, and governance, reshaping incentives to reward deflection and penalize transparency. Once embedded, they transmit the tactics generationally through curricula and mass media that normalize victimhood framing and role reversal as legitimate discourse. Technological platforms accelerate dissemination via algorithms that prioritize outrage, tribal signaling, and accusations of prejudice, creating rapid feedback loops that reward deployment and punish dissent. The result is institutional capture and a self-reinforcing cycle. Normalized tactics produce more practitioners, which further erodes trust and critical thinking. Reversal is possible but demands deliberate, unflinching countermeasures. Recognition must begin at the individual level through real-time identification of the sequence, meticulous documentation of facts, and firm boundary enforcement that refuses engagement with role reversal attempts. Institutions require psychological screening for leadership positions, curricular reform that restores factual analysis, and explicit instruction on identifying and countering these patterns. Public discourse must name the tactics consistently and precisely, attaching clear social costs to their use. Decentralization of influence, cultivation of personal responsibility, and sustained exposure of the feedback loop are essential to interrupt the cycle. In conclusion, the dynamics of defensive rhetorical tactics in contemporary societies reveal a unified framework of manipulation that threatens the very existence of accountable, evidence-based civilization. Darvo and its allied techniques, gaslighting, projection, coercive control, and culturally reinforced deflection, do not merely evade justice. They actively invert moral order, reward predation, and facilitate large-scale societal reconfiguration without consent. When combined with ideological subversion and global networks that leverage honor, shame, and collectivist logics, these patterns enable coordinated influence over migration, policy, and culture while shielding perpetrators behind perpetual victimhood. Societies that tolerate or normalize them condemn themselves to progressive institutional brittleness, collapsing trust, and eventual fragmentation. Only widespread, unflinching recognition, paired with pedagogical immunization, institutional safeguards, and cultural insistence on universal accountability, can restore resilience. The path forward is clear. Expose the sequence relentlessly, reject the inversion of roles, and rebuild norms grounded in verifiable truth, rather than manufactured grievance. Failure to confront these tactics decisively ensures their continued success in dismantling the foundations of free and cohesive societies. Recognition is the first and indispensable step toward reclaiming agency and securing a future where power answers to evidence, not evasion. Read the foundational report, The Dynamics of Defensive Rhetorical Tactics in Contemporary Societies, Darvo and Other Psychological Manipulation or Manipulative Tactics, along with further resources and aligned content by going to Real Free News. Honor formed the bedrock of the knight and noble's existence. It meant a man's word stood as solid as the citadel's curtain walls, unyielding against every assault. This chapter reveals honor as both inherited reputation and daily discipline, demanding truth in counsel, fidelity to oaths, and integrity even when costly. Through vivid examples like the Song of Roland and the life of William Marshall, it shows how honor elevated the sword from tool of violence to instrument of righteousness, shaping judgments, tournaments, and self-examination within the citadel. Lost honor brought ruin far beyond lost lands. Preserved honor forged trust, legacy, and moral architecture for all other virtues. This is the Citadel Code. The audiobook is available free online, hard copy and ebook available at internet booksellers. Enchiridion by Epictetus. I declare to you that some things lie in our power while others do not. And you will live free and undisturbed only by fixing your attention strictly on what depends upon your will, your opinions, desires, and aversions. I caution you to desire only what is possible and to avoid only what is in your power. For if you wish things to happen exactly as they do happen, you will never be disappointed. I advise you to remember that everything outside your will is merely on loan and can be recalled at any moment. So treat wife, child, property, and reputation as temporary gifts. I counsel you not to trouble yourself with future events, for when they arrive, you will meet them with the same faculty of reason you possess now. I proclaim that it is not things themselves that disturb men, but their opinions about things, and therefore you must change your judgments if you wish to be tranquil. I remind you that the gods have given you the faculty to bear whatever happens. So when you suffer loss or pain, know that you have the power to endure it nobly. I teach you that when you see someone weeping or angry over externals, remember that it is not the event, but his opinion of it that torments him. I instruct you never to call yourself a philosopher or stoic in public, but to show it by your actions rather than by your words. I command you to train yourself as an athlete trains, so that when misfortune comes, you will already be practiced in bearing it without complaint. I urge you to remember that everything has two handles, one that can be carried and one that cannot. Always seize it by the handle that allows you to bear it. I tell you that when you see a beautiful person or a fine estate, say to yourself at once, "This is only an impression," and pass on unmoved. I advise you to act always as a man would act, who knows he is mortal, and will one day return what belongs to the gods. I warn you that if you wish to improve, you must be willing to appear foolish and ignorant for a time, for no one becomes excellent without first seeming ridiculous. I declare that when you are invited to a banquet, remember you are not only a guest, but also a judge of what is set before you. Take only what is fitting. I instruct you to behave in life as you would at a banquet. Take what comes your way with moderation and gratitude, and when it is taken away, depart without complaint. I teach you that when you see someone weeping for his child or his fortune, remember that what has happened is not the real evil. The evil is his opinion of it. I remind you that you are an actor in a play assigned to you by the author. Play your part well, whether it is short or long, rich or poor. I command you never to be carried away by appearances of pleasure, for nothing great is achieved without toil and self-restraint. I tell you that if you wish to be free, you must learn to wish that everything happens as it does happen, for only then are you master of yourself. I warn you that every habit and faculty is strengthened or weakened by the corresponding actions. So train yourself daily in what you wish to become strong. I advise you to keep death and exile before your eyes every day, so that you will never desire what is base or fear what is inevitable. I declare that philosophy is not merely to talk about virtue, but to practice it. Show me your progress by how you live, not by what you say. I instruct you that when someone praises you or flatters you, remember to say inwardly, "This is not about me. It is about their opinion." I teach you that the true measure of a man is not what he possesses. I counsel you to examine your desires carefully, for most of what people desire is not in their power, and therefore brings only disappointment. I remind you that it is better to die of hunger with a free mind than to live in luxury with a slave's mind. I warn you never to let the impression of any external thing carry you away. Pause and give yourself time to judge it rightly. I tell you that when you are angry at someone, remember that it is your own opinion that has angered you, not the person himself. I command you to live as a free man, not as a slave to fear, desire, or the opinions of others. I advise you to perform every action as though it were your last, with full attention and dignity. I instruct you that the chief duty of a human being is to understand the will of the gods and to follow it cheerfully. I declare that when you undertake any task, consider its consequences before you begin, so you will not later regret your choice. I teach you to be silent more often than you speak, for speech is silver, but silence is golden. I warn you never to laugh at another's misfortune, for the same fate may await you tomorrow. I counsel you to accustom yourself to the simplest food, clothing, and lodging, so that you may never be a slave to luxury. I remind you that when you associate with others, do not lower yourself to their level. Raise them to yours if possible. I tell you that if anyone tells you that you are not a philosopher, do not be angry. Simply continue to live as one. I advise you to walk and speak and act as a man who knows he is under the eye of the gods. I command you never to be elated by success or cast down by failure, for both are outside your true self. I declare that the body is a vessel for the soul. Care for it only as much as is necessary, but do not make it your master. I instruct you that when you have done a good deed, do not expect praise or reward. The doing itself is the reward. I teach you to endure everything that happens as if you had chosen it yourself, for then it ceases to be a burden. I warn you that the beginning of philosophy is the confession of ignorance and the willingness to learn. I counsel you never to discuss philosophy with the uneducated, for they will only ridicule what they cannot understand. I remind you that every man is the architect of his own fortune through the use or misuse of his will. I declare that true education consists in learning to desire and to avoid only what is right. I tell you that if you wish to be great, you must first become small in your own eyes. I advise you to seek truth for its own sake, not for the sake of seeming wise. I command you to live each day as though it were your entire life, making every action worthy of a rational being. I instruct you that the wise man is content with what he has and desires nothing that is not his. I warn you never to put off the practice of virtue until tomorrow, for tomorrow is uncertain. I teach you that the final proof of a Stoic is to be able to say with truth, I have done what was mine to do. I conclude that the whole of philosophy is contained in this: to know what is in your power and what is not, and to live accordingly with courage, justice, and wisdom. Greatness is never born from one single heroic choice made in a dramatic moment. Thousands of small, correct daily decisions made when no one watches create unstoppable momentum that compounds into extraordinary results. Establish a simple morning ritual of one focus, one action, and one boundary, then close each evening by choosing one improvement for tomorrow. Consistency builds confidence, energy, and identity until challenges shrink and opportunities multiply. Reflection reinforces progress without self-criticism, turning ordinary days into the foundation of lasting impact. No perfection required, only persistence. Begin today and become the person who decides daily. This is the power of one decision. The audiobook is available free online, hard copy and ebook available at internet booksellers. Thank you for listening to Real Free News with Matt Wyman. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, and write what you think in the comment section. View past reports and the 24/7 live stream on the video hosting platforms. Check out the Real Free News store for real free food, books, merch, and more, including The White Imperative. The ebook is available for pre-order now. The audiobook will be available free online, and the hardcover edition releases June 8th. Tune in again, and until then, remember to keep it real. Free news.